This assembly video for the 3D printed Curta Calculator supplements the build manual. Assembly begins by fastening the tens bell spring to the tens bell. I forgot that step and started by putting the tens bell into the main casting. After that, a washer is added, then a C-clip is added on top of that to hold the tens bell in place. The two parts should spin freely. Lubricate with PTFE dry lubricant as necessary. Next, I connect the support columns. These are threaded using an M4 die. There are 4 holes the correct size along the bottom of the main casting, and there are 3 support columns. Use the holes not centered under the smaller group of cuts in the main casting. That hole is for the reversing lever. Secure the support columns with M4 nuts tightened lightly. Do not put a support column in the marked hole. I am now ready to begin assembling the bearing plate and step drum. The bottom of the main axle slides into the bottom of the step drum. Note that the top of the shaft is to my left with the teeth facing down. In this orientation, the flat side of the flanged portion of the axle faces me. The fit should be snug and should not rotate. The step drum assembly is inserted into the bearing plate. A small anti-rotation plate is fastened with an M5 screw to prevent rotation in any position except the correct ones for addition and subtraction. Tighten securely, but do not over-tighten. The step drum should rotate freely without much friction. Lubricate with PTFE dry lubricant before assembly. The zero positioning lever is added next. Insert the bolt into its sleeve, making it a shoulder bolt. Insert the shoulder bolt into the lever. The roller should be fastened onto the other end of the lever with an M5 bolt and nut. Slide the zero positioning lever spring onto the lever with its leg in the middle hole. There are 2 pairs of larger and smaller holes on the bearing plate. The zero positioning lever goes into the larger hole without threads. Insert the zero positioning lever to the base plate and fasten loosely enough that the lever moves easily. Use some thread lock if necessary. When adding the zero positioning lever, ensure the other leg of its spring inserts into the small hole in the base plate. Test the tension on the zero positioning lever. It should spring back toward the main shaft consistently. If it does not, loosen the nut holding it to the base plate. Lift the zero positioning lever away from the main shaft and slide the zero positioning disc onto the bottom of the main shaft. Slide the zero positioning disc clip into the slot between the zero positioning disc and the main bearing plate. Secure the zero positioning disc to the main shaft with a pin. Tap it into place if necessary. Ensure that the step drum turns smoothly and that it cannot be turned in reverse. To attach the anti-reversal lever, put an M5 bolt through the sheath to make it a shoulder bolt. Slide the shoulder bolt through the anti-reversal lever and place the anti-reversal lever spring over the anti-reversal lever. The spring's second leg should be pushed into place so that the spring provides tension against the toothed portion of the zero positioning disc. Once the anti-reversal lever is in place, flick it away from the zero positioning disc and make sure that it snaps back to the zero positioning disc quickly and consistently. With both the zero positioning lever and the anti-reversal pawl in place, make sure that the main shaft still rotates smoothly and easily. Here, I forgot to add the tins bell spring onto the tins bell, so I am detaching the C-clip and removing the tins bell in order to add that spring back in. The tins bell spring is attached to the tins bell underneath by two M4 screws. Fasten the main shaft and bearing plate to the support columns to connect it to the upper casting and tins bell. Use the M4 nuts at the bottom of the support columns to do this. Make them secure, but do not over-tighten them. Ensure that the main axle still turns easily and smoothly. Pair each transmission axle to its lock gear and input gear according to my notes in the build guide. Place each transmission shaft in its place in the Curta frame. See the build guide for the correct order. Place the transmission shaft lock ring on top of the Curta over the transmission shaft gears. Secure it into place with 3 M3 screws. The reversing lever is assembled by placing the axle into the bottom of the lever handle. To just below the hole in the back side, drop a spring from a cheap ballpoint pen into the hole and place a 6 mm ball on top. Slide a tool in the top of the reversing lever to prevent the ball from popping out of the top, and then use another tool to plunge the ball as far as it will go. While holding the ball in place, push the reversing lever axle up until it hits the tool holding the ball in place. Push the axle through as you remove the tool. Then rotate the axle so that the ball is pressed into one of the two divots in the axle. Slide the large spacer to the bottom of the reversing lever and the small spacer onto the top. Line up the lock gears to the tins bell. Next, insert the carry levers. The leg of the lever should slide between the lock gear and the carry gear. Test each carry lever. They should snap up and down easily. Extra friction here is the most common reason for math errors. Secure each carry lever with an M4 screw. The head of the screw should hold the bearing in place. Align the turns counter transmission gears just above the step drum. The gears should be lined up with each other pretty closely. The first shaft has 3 gears. Align the middle gear with the rest. Place the reversing lever over the gears so that the notched bottom section drops into the slot on the bearing plate. The top of the reversing lever should position under the edge of the main casting and slide up through the hole there. It may be necessary to pull the shaft down inside the reversing lever knob to fit the top of the shaft under the main casting. Shift the reversing lever upwards so the bottom locks into place on the bearing plate. Then secure the reversing lever with an M4 nut. Align the results lock gears with the tins bell, then insert the carry levers into the slots on the main carriage. As before, the leg of the carry lever goes between the lock gear and the carry gear. Secure the carry lever with an M4 screw. The head of the screw should hold the carry lever bearing in place. The carry levers should pop up and down easily. Take care here since the carry lever consistency is the hardest part of the assembly. With all the carry levers and the reversing lever in place, ensure that the step drum still rotates easily. Press each carry lever to its lower position and then rotate the step drum and ensure that the tins bell resets every carry lever to its upper position. If a carry lever does not reset, its bearing may be too high in the main carriage. The top of each carry lever bearing should sit at or just under the top edge of the main carriage. Another reason the carry levers may fail to reset is that the carry lever springs might also be too tight, creating too much friction or aligning too high or too low on the carry lever. Adjust the springs as necessary. To assemble the selector shafts, put the shaft through the bottom of the selector knob until it's just under the hole in the back of the knob, where the top of the knob is the closest to the hole. Press a finger over the top of the knob. Next, drop a cheap ballpoint pen spring into the hole of the knob and a 6 mm ball on top of that. Use a narrow tool to press the ball down. Keeping the ball pressed down, remove the selector shaft and slide it into the top of the knob where your finger had been. Block the ball's exit with the selector shaft and remove the tool. Then push the selector shaft the rest of the way down. Repeat that process for each of the 8 selector knobs. Slide the collar down over the top of the curta. This may be a tight fit, but I have widened the model some to make it easier. Align the holes in the top edge of the collar to the holes in the top ring of the main carriage. Secure the collar with M3 screws. These screws need to be low profile. I used panhead Phillips screws, but I also had to drill out the countersink slightly. Slide the Curta into the lower housing. The fingers between the selector knobs may need to be pressed slightly in order to slide under the collar. Ensure that the Curta seats all the way down into the housing. To assemble the carriage, begin with the carriage casting. The results and turns counter dial axles are fit into place. These may be a loose or slightly tight fit. When the results and turns counter dials are fit to the axles, make sure to keep the dial and the axle paired together. Now add the results and turns counter dials to the axles, keeping the original pairings. Fit the carriage cage onto the carriage casting and dials. The flat edge at the end of each axle should face upwards towards the carriage cage. Press the carriage cage and dial axles together, snapping them into place. Place a cheap ballpoint pen spring and the clearing plate plunger into the carriage casting. Make sure that it moves easily and smoothly. Place a 6 mm ball in each of the holes around the carriage casting. There should be 17. Place the spider spring onto the carriage casting so that every finger of the spring rests over a ball bearing. Place the spacer over the spider spring, then press the clearing cover over the rest of the carriage. Push the crank collar and spacer into the carriage and secure it with the printed nut underneath. Do not turn the carriage over to do this or the 6mm balls may be unseated. The nut should be secure, but loose enough that the dials turn easily. If it is tightened too much, the transmission shafts may be put under too much stress. At this point, the clearing lever may be tested. It may be stiff the first time around, but it should reset each dial to 0. The upper portion of the carriage and the knurled grip are both threaded. These two should turn together. It may be tough to fasten these two together as you approach the end. Once the two are fastened, secure them into place with a pin. Hold the Curta body horizontally and drop a 6 mm ball into the hole in the side of the main casting. Keeping the body horizontal, slide the completed carriage onto the Curta body, aligning the first results dial with the first selector knob. Place the carriage pressure spring and retaining ring into the crank collar and secure them with a C-clip. Assemble the crank by placing the crank handle onto the crank arm and securing it with the printed pin screw. Align the crank so that the handle is between the first results dial and the last turns counter dial and push it onto the main shaft. Press the crank pin into place as far as you can by hand, then tap it the rest of the way with the tool. Now that the Curta has been assembled, let's do a little bit of math. I'm going to run through the powers of 2. So we're going to start out with the input at 1, give this a rotate, and we are at 1. If we add 1 again, we get 2. Add 2 to 4. Add 4 to 8. Add 8. We get our first carry operation to 16. 16. We go to 32. 32 to 64. 64 to 128. 128 to 256. To 512. And then to 1024, the number of bytes in a kilobyte.